Each of you for your service, and thank you for being here today. We clearly have a crisis at our southern border. It is a complete failure. I don't think anybody can deny that. America is a more dangerous place because President Biden, Board Czar, Vice President Kamala Harris, and Secretary Mayorkas have allowed criminals, drugs, terrorists, and other dangerous people into our communities all across our great country. There are real consequences to the failure to secure the border, and each victim has a name. Lincoln Riley, Rachel Morin, Jocelyn Nogari, Lisbeth Gutierrez Salazar, and her two sons, 10-year-old Juan and 7-year-old Julian. These are just a few of the many Americans killed by illegal immigrants that were released into our country by Joe Biden. Real Americans, average citizens, the ones that live a normal life, are being killed. Real American families are being torn apart by vicious crimes and deadly drugs because we have a wide open southern border, intentionally done by President Biden. As President Biden's borders are, Vice President Harris' utter failures to secure our southern border have allowed historic illegal immigration and tons of deadly fentanyl to pour into our communities and kill thousands of our fellow Americans. We also know that the federal government is an expert at wasting our taxpayer dollars. I want to thank each of you for being here today, for your courage to speak up in an effort to improve our federal government. I introduced the Stop Human Trafficking of Unaccompanied Migrant Children Act, which addresses the unbelievable reports of unaccompanied migrant children being released to sponsors under this administration who have not received proper screening from the Department of Health and Human Services. You can't imagine they're doing this. This bill will ensure extensive vetting by DHS and HHS before a vulnerable, unaccompanied child is placed with a sponsor. A 2023 report from the New York Times, which is not known for being unfriendly to the Biden administration, stated that during the first 2 years of Biden's presidency, his administration could not reach more than 85,000 children. That's unacceptable. Mr. Jones and Mr. Taylor, I have a few questions for each of you. Do you believe DNA tests of illegal aliens should be administered before pre-release and as part of the process when HHS places an unaccompanied migrant child with a prospective relative sponsor?
Senator Scott, the DNA tool is invaluable, especially when establishing the family units. So the short answer is yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Taylor?
Concur, absolutely, Senator. Yes. Yep.
Can you please talk about the importance for testing the DNA of illegal aliens and criminals at our borders as it refers to matching it with prior crimes committed in the U.S.? Any of you?
Senator Scott, the DNA Fingerprint Act is a valuable tool that was enacted back in 2006. And it allows us to look at the latent or crimes that are currently unsolved, cold cases, and match them against known identities. So when we're collecting at the border and adding those known identities and then immediately matching them to open criminality, it's an outstanding tool for law enforcement. One of the things we found since 2020 is that in the matches that we have actually seen, and in 2023, sir, there were 1,037 matches due to the DHS collection, even at 37%. We actually found a cold case and reopened it from 1972, sir. The ability to give closure to families, reassurance to victims, and to actually exonerate those who are wrongly accused is something that the DNA Fingerprint Act gives us the ability to do. And by only 37% compliance, there is some progress, but we believe it's linear. So if that's the case, we likely missed over 1,600 violent criminals in 2023 alone.
Mr. Taylor.
Yes, Senator. If to Mr. Jones' point, he is correct. We believe these statistics are linear. At a 37% compliance rate last year, there were still, not including the gotaways and the other unknowns, which we do not know, there were still almost 2 million people that we did not collect their DNA from, that we processed at the border. Though this is slowly improvement. In 2017, CBP, ICE, and DHS, we were collecting DNA from about 3% of people that we encountered. There were a lot of reasons. misinformation reporting up. The thought for that low level at the time was CBP argued that DNA was being collected downstream and they were being turned over to U.S. Marshals or possibly other law enforcement entities. That was not the case. But to just answer, the short answer to your question is absolutely. It's inarguable. One thing, help me out if I misspeak here. I believe at even a 37% compliance rate, CBP is responsible for about 40%, 42% of the annual cases that are being solved through the entire FBI CODIS index. So we're one law enforcement agency, granted CBP's one of the largest law enforcement agencies, or the largest in the country, but one agency's solving 40%, or presumptively solving or opening 40% of the cases resident out of the X millions in the FBI CODIS DNA, FBI CODIS index. Right along those lines, too, what's even more interesting is I believe CODIS was first operational in 1997, and we've just started effectively giving them a fair amount of samples less than 4 years ago. So if we're solving almost 40% of the annual cases that are being presumptively clued in every year, imagine what we would be doing, at a 90 or 95% rate.
Yeah. Mr. Wynn?
Senator, if I can just kind of put some numbers behind what Mike and Mark have just said. I want to share some numbers with you that apply to simply CODIS hits on DNA samples that were collected just by Customs and Border Protection in FY24. So just from October 2023 to June 2024, DNA samples submitted to CODIS by Customs and Border Protection have hit on 10 homicides, 145 forcible sex offenses, 97 instances of larceny, burglary, robbery, or embezzlement, and 10 assaults. So that is just a sample at less than 100% compliance. So I just ask you to imagine if we were at full compliance, the number of cold cases and crimes that we would be helping to solve.
Why aren't they doing it?
Senator, we've speculated on that question numerous occasions, and I can't give you an answer that I would call definitive. I can speculate, but to me and to us, it's a no-brainer. We should be putting more effort into getting us closer to 100% compliance every day.
So do you think it's a directive from senior leadership?
Again,
you don't know.
I could only speculate.
Anybody else?
Senator, as was articulated earlier, there were some CBP employees that recently went down to the southern border, and they had visited approximately 12 different stations or offices that were processing migrants. And they noted that DNA was not being collected at any of those facilities. So you asked the question, is this being directed by executive management? For something that's a requirement from law that's part of the booking process, that sort of thing, I cannot believe, I don't think a reasonable person would believe that has not been okayed somewhere up the food chain. It would almost be akin to continually question someone after you arrested them to not reading their Miranda rights or not taking their fingerprints. It's part of the booking process now. It's codified in the law, particularly from the clarification that then Attorney General Barr did in early 2020 that DHS will collect DNA from those non-U.S. persons detained under United States law. This is not this isn't a you may or you can if you would like. It's a you shall. And the fact that it's not being done with clearly no repercussions could lead one to reasonably deduce that this non-compliance is sanctioned at a high level.
Could DNA testing at the border have prevented any of the horrific murders by the illegal aliens we have witnessed under the Biden administration?
Senator, obviously we cannot say so with certainty, but at a minimum, every collection of DNA represents a potential new investigative lead that could lead to the solving of many of the outstanding crimes.
Okay. If DNA would have been collected from illegal aliens entering our country, would it have prevented potential attacks like the attempted breach of the Marine Corps base Quantico by Jordanian nationals in the U.S. Illegally?
Senator Scott, that is another one that's hard to say, because unless there was an open case of DNA, latent DNA that would have been matched to that subject, those individuals would have had their profiles logged, but they would have not come up as an active or an open situation. Mm-hmm. If I may step back, you asked about, you'd mentioned the Morin case earlier. Mm-hmm. What we do know about that case is that we as CBP had the immigrant in custody 3 times, never collected his DNA. He became, on his 4th entry, a got-away and got past CBP and Border Patrol. We know that in March of last year, he was involved in a home invasion and a rape of a mother and her 9-year-old child. DNA was taken at that crime scene and submitted to CODIS. There was no match because we did not take that DNA. Between March and August, this individual was free to roam about the United States when Rachel Morin was raped and murdered. Do we know that if we had had that initial hit that we should have gotten, we could have stopped him? We don't. But we do know that law enforcement would have had a name, a photograph, and fingerprints of who to look for. And over that period from March to August, if he had been stopped by state and local, if he had been encountered by other federal officials, that record would have been an NCIC, and he would have been detained as a person of interest in that home invasion and rape of the mother and child. So it works, sir. Is it going to stop things? Logically, we think so. We believe so. We can't tell you for sure, but I would bet my paycheck that they will most certainly prevent other criminality when we're able to identify someone who has already committed criminal acts.
So, we all have families, right? So so what do you think the purpose is that they want to open the borders and not make sure criminals aren't coming across? They have to have, the people who are making these decisions have to have families too. Why do you think they don't care?
Senator, you actually have us at a loss for words also. We can't figure it out. We have families, as you said. When we first got involved in this project, when it was originally assigned to us by our then commissioner, we started the research and we worked with the FBI and the Bureau of Prisons and started looking at what the success stories were. And they motivated us because it was individuals that we had encountered multiple times and had never taken their DNA. And they went to do horrible acts, rapes and murders. And each time we had a success story, it motivated us. It was, we were able to now detect this person who is in our country that is and has committed criminal acts, and we're now able to interdict them because of this law and this process. So why? No, sir, I have no idea why.
Okay. Well, first off, thank you for being willing to speak up. And I hope you're being treated fairly. So I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Senator Scott, Senator Grassley has been a champion for us in the whistleblower retaliation piece.
Yeah.
Our retaliation started in earnest in February of 2018 when the 3 of us were removed from our positions in one day. I was removed as a director of the WMD division. Mr. Taylor was my deputy, and Fred was part of our team. The division was disbanded, and since then, we have sat without a counter WMD division within Customs and Border Protection. That, to me, is also another vulnerability that has been created because we've been retaliated against for coming forward and bringing this to the attention of our leadership.
I just don't get it. I just understand why people don't want to secure a country. It doesn't make sense. Yes, sir.
Senator Scott, if the initial attorney that wrote the initial disclosure about CBP's non-compliance with collecting DNA, very, very sharp gentleman. Unfortunately, he has left federal service. But it took us an hour and a half to explain to him because he could, when we were first explaining our disclosure, because it was absolutely not plausible to him.
Right.
He just kept saying this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. This absolutely does not make sense.
Right.
And as we started showing, we provided him all the background information for the law. We provided statistics from the FBI. We provided statistics from CBP's own website. This is how many encounters we had. We had 600,000 encounters. The whole agency sent in 304 DNA samples, and we presume most of those came from our JTTF task force guys that were working with the Bureau. We've heard theories of this noncompliance of that the fact that Attorney General Barr changed the law in March 2020 and gave the Attorney General the absolute authority to order DHS to do so. There's been speculation that, they're not bigger than us. Nobody's going to tell us what to do. That does not explain what had transpired in the decade beforehand. But to your point, and I wish it was, I think one of the greatest impressions we made on the individual, the investigator, the Office of Special Counsel that wrote the original disclosure report, was he could not get over he said he could put no logic to it. And he was quite an analytical individual. And he just said it did not make sense when he explained it to then Special Counsel Henry Kerner either. It said, to your point, this is an absolute no-brainer.
Right.
That the technology we were going to speak to earlier did not come down to. The FBI has streamlined the process. It adds about 30 seconds to the booking process to swab DNA, to tie that particular swab to the with a barcode. You can shoot with a gun that's automatically tied to the prints in the person's profile. The backlog, according to the FBI, according to last week, is all but non-existent anymore. And even if they don't get results for 2 to 5 days, to Mark's previous point, if this person is already out of custody, at least their DNA profile is linked to their arrest profile, their interdiction profile, just like their fingerprints are, just like their photograph is. And a great example that came up before, the recent New York machete case, where the gentleman's name was Christian Nganlangi. This was a case in New York City, you may be familiar. He tied up the young man and the young lady and raped the young girl. He committed this crime on June 13th in 2024. DNA was collected from the young lady through the victim kit. He was identified immediately because a DNA sample was taken by immigration officials 3 years prior to that. He was on the lam. The gentleman was arrested 5 days later. And when they caught him, it was in the news. Apparently, he was hiding under a vehicle. So there was an example of, in a very short period of time, we know who this guy is. We know he's here in New York, and we're going to find him. So again, we understand there are a lot of political things I'd mentioned before. Your rival here today, that this passed the House 416-4 and passed unanimously in the Senate. This is probably one of the least partisan pieces of legislation in the last 100 years. I don't follow all that, but we seldom see such agreement that this is really a good idea. And somehow we're not doing it. And to your point, it is absolutely inexplicable.
All right. Well, thanks for what each of you are doing. And you're right, Senator Grassley does a great job working with whistleblowers and taking tough issues and trying to make something good happen. He does a great job. So thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.